Hello everyone. Today, our topic is about pragmatic analysis, and it is under discourse analysis. So, now let's discuss what is pragmatic analysis. Pragmatics is an essential tool for analyzing discourse because it helps us understand not just the words people use, but also the meaning behind them. When we study conversations or read the text, it is not enough to look at the literal words. We must consider how context, speaker intention, and social situations affect meaning. This is why, as Alba Joes 2009 points out, analyzing discourse without a basic understanding of pragmatics is nearly impossible. In pragmatic analysis, we often use context clues to interpret unknown words or phrases. For example, if someone says, "It is cold in here," they might literally mean the temperature is low. Or they could be indirectly asking someone to close the window or turn on the heater. By considering pragmatic factors, we can better understand both the speaker's intention and the full meaning of the conversation. Without this understanding, we would only grasp part of what is being communicated. Now, discourse analysis in turn is composed of a wide range of sub-disciplines such as pragmatics, conversational analysis, speech act theory, and ethnography of speaking. Pragmatics looks at meaning in context. Conversational analysis examines the structure and patterns of conversations. Speech act theory studies how people performs actions through speaking. And ethnography of speaking explores how language is used in different cultures and social groups. Together, these sub-disciplines help us understand both what is said and how it is said, making our analysis of communication more complete and accurate. Next slide, please. Now, pragmatics assumes that when people communicate with each other, they normally follow some kind of cooperative principle, which is they have a shared understanding of how they should cooperate in their communication. Moreover, pragmatics assumes that when people communicate, they usually follow a cooperative principle. This means that speakers and listeners have a shared understanding of how to cooperate in conversation. They follow unspoken rules to make communication effective, such as taking turns speaking, being relevant, and providing enough information. By following this principle, people can understand each other's intention and meaning more clearly, even when the words themselves might be ambiguous. So next slide is the speech act. So a speech act is an action that a speaker performs through the act of speaking. In other words, when we talk, we are not just producing words. We are doing something with what? With them. For instance, when someone asks a question, they are not merely stating words. They are seeking information. When a person makes a request or gives an order, they are trying to influence someone's behavior. Similarly, making a promise shows a commitment to act in the future. Giving advice aims to guide someone's action, and making a threat communicates intended consequences. Understanding speech act is important in discourse analysis because it helps us go beyond the literal meaning of words to recognize the speaker's intention. Like for example, if someone says, excuse me, if someone says, "Can you close the window?" They may literally be asking a question about your ability, but the intended speech act is actually a polite request for you to close the window. By studying speech acts, we can better interpret how people use language to achieve goals, interact with others, and convey meaning directly, which is essential in analyzing in real life communication. Next slide, please. So next is the types of speech act. So, locational act refers to the literal meaning of the actual words, while a locutionary act refers to the speaker's intention in uttering words, and last is the perlocutionary act refers to the effect the utterance has on the thoughts or actions of the other person. In understanding how people communicate, speech acts plays an important role because they show that language is not only about words, but also about actions. When we speak, we perform actions through our words, and this action can be classified into three types, which is the locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary act. So first is the locutionary act. Refers to the literal meaning of the words spoken. It focuses on what is actually said without considering the speaker's intention or the listener's reaction. For example, if someone says, "It is raining outside," the locutionary act is simply stating the fact that it is raining. An illocutionary act, on the other hand, refers to the speaker's intention in uttering the words. It is what the speaker aims to achieve through their statement. For instance, when someone says, "Can you pass me the salt?" The locutionary act is a request, not just a question about ability. The speaker's intends for the listeners to take action. Finally, a perlocutionary act refers to the effect the utterance has on the listener's thoughts, feelings, or actions. It focuses on the response or outcome caused by what was said. For example, if someone warns, "Watch out, the floor is wet," and the listener steps carefully or avoids slipping, the perlocutionary act is the action or reaction resulting from the warning. By studying these types of speech acts, we can see how meaning in communication is more than just words. Together with pragmatics and the cooperative principle, understanding speech acts help us analyze how speakers achieve their goals, how listeners interpret messages, and how effective communication occurs in real life.
Good day everyone. Today I will discuss the direct and indirect speech act. Whenever there is a direct relationship between a structure and a function, we have a direct speech act. So when we say direct speech act, the structure and the function match. For example, if I say close the door, the structure is a command and the function is also a command. So that's a direct speech act. Whenever there is indirect relationship between a structure and a function, we have an indirect speech act. It means when it comes to indirect speech act, the structure and the function don't match. For example, if I say it's cold here, I might actually want you to close the window. So the words looks like a statement, diba? Kasi it's cold here, but I actually want you to close the window. So the word looks like a statement, but the function is actually a request. So that's the differences between the two, the direct and the indirect speech act. So next po, let's look at this example. It's cold outside. If I just want to tell you the weather, that's a direct speech act or a statement. But if I actually want you to close the door or window, then that's an indirect speech because while telling you it's cold outside, what I mean there is, can you please close the door or window because it's cold? So that's an indirect speech act. So sometimes we don't just listen to the words, but also the hidden meaning are behind them. Next, please. Now, let's move on to felicity conditions. So, this simply means the conditions that make a speech act work or succeed. So, first one is the hearer must understand the language. Second, the speaker must be serious, not just pretending. So, for a speech act to be effective, both sides need to cooperate. Someone must mean it and someone must understand it. So, next slide. For declarations or directives like giving orders, requests, or making something official, there are more conditions. First one is the speaker must believe in the action is possible. The second one is it should be in the best interest of the hearer. The third one is the speaker should be sincere. And the fourth one is the words themselves already count as the action. For example, when a judge says or a priest, I now pronounce you husband and wife. So the words make the act real. Next, please. Lastly, let's talk about the presupposition. So, it refers to the common ground that is assumed to exist between language users, such as assumed knowledge of a situation or the world. So, this is simply the background knowledge that both the speaker and the listener share. For example, if I say, Maria stopped smoking, so it presupposes that Maria used to smoke before. So presupposition, it is about what we assume the listener already knows or believe when we say something. So that's the presupposition. So now I'll pass it on the next reporter who will go deeper into this topic.
Good day, everyone. I will continue the discussion by explaining the types of presupposition. There are two types, conventional and pragmatics. Next slide, please. Let's begin with conventional presuppositions. These are less context dependent. This means they don't really rely on the situation or background knowledge of the speaker and listener. Instead, they are usually linked to a particular linguistic forms or structures in a sentence. Certain words or phrases act as triggers that automatically carry presuppositions. We have an example here. Would you like some coffee? This suggests that the coffee is already prepared. But if we say, would you like anything to drink? This does not suggest that a drink has already been prepared. The difference is not in the context, but in the word choice and form of the utterance. That is why it is called conventional. Next slide, please. Now, let's move on to the second type, pragmatic presuppositions. These are context dependent. Unlike conventional presuppositions that are built into the language structure, pragmatic presuppositions arise from the use of an utterance in a particular situation. In other words, both the speaker and the listener need to rely on shared background knowledge or assumptions for the utterance to make sense. To understand this better, let's look at the example. If someone says, Maria's brother is coming home, the presupposition here is that Maria has a brother. This assumption is not directly stated, but it is understood because of the context. The utterance only makes sense if both the speaker and the listener already accept that Maria exists and that she has a brother. This shows that pragmatic presuppositions are situation-based and rely heavily on shared understanding between the people involved in the conversation. So, to summarize, conventional presuppositions are linked to a language forms and are less dependent on context, while pragmatic presuppositions depend on the situation and shared knowledge. Next, please. Now, let's move on to the cooperative principle, proposed by philosopher Paul Grice. This principle explains that in a conversation, people normally assume that both the speaker and the listener are cooperating with each other to achieve clear communication. In other words, both sides are working together to establish meaning. It is composed of four maxims: quality, quantity, relation, and manner. Next slide, please. Let's apply these maxims to a short conversation. The husband asks, "Where are the car keys?" This question is direct and clear. The husband's goal here is simple. He just wants to locate the car keys. The wife replies, "They're on the table in the hall." Her answer is a perfect example of how the cooperative principle works. She speaks clearly without adding confusing details. This shows the maxim of manner. Then she gives an answer that is truthful. She tells the exact location of the keys. This shows the maxim of quality. And she provides just the right amount of information, not too long and not too short. This shows the maxim of quantity. And most importantly, her response is relevant to the question. She does not change the topic or give unrelated information. This shows the maxim of relation. In this short exchange, we can see that both the husband and the wife are cooperating to achieve clear communication. The husband asks a proper question and the wife gives a proper answer, following all four maxims.
By the way, I am Sam Balonto, and now let's talk about flouting the cooperative principle in communication and how it connects to cross-cultural pragmatics. When we communicate, we usually follow what Grice calls the cooperative principle. This principle is guided by four conversational maxims: quality, quantity, relation, and manner. But here's the interesting part. People don't always follow them. Sometimes, they deliberately flout the maxims in order to create implicatures or hidden meanings. What does hidden meanings about? This means that even when someone seems to break the rules of conversation, they are still cooperating, just in a more subtle way. Listeners then have to use inference to figure out what the speaker really means. And now let's look at an example of flouting the maxim of quality. Suppose someone says, "When we moved here, the room was 5 by 4. Now it is 3 by 4. Of course, rooms don't always shrink, so the speaker may be using irony or exaggeration to emphasize a change in perception. The hidden message could be about discomfort, disappointment, or simply humor. Another example, someone asks, "Where does Mark live?" And the reply is, "Somewhere in the south of France." On the surface, this means vague, but the implicature might be that the speaker either doesn't know the exact location or prefers not to reveal it. Now, let's consider the maxim of relation. Imagine this short exchange. Person A says, "I'm out of petrol." Person B replies, "There is a garage round the corner." At first, this might look unrelated, but in fact, it's perfectly relevant. Person B is indirectly offering a solution without saying it outright. This is a great example of how conversational meaning often goes beyond the literal words. Moving on to the maxim of manner. Here's an example. Person A asks, "Should I get something for the kids?" Person B responds, "But I veto ICECREAM." Notice what's happening here. Instead of plainly refusing, person B uses spelling and humor. It avoids a direct no, but still makes the meaning clear, especially if children are listening. This playful flouting of the maxim of manner adds subtlety and engagement. So what we see here is that flouting maxims is not random, it's intentional. It invites the listener to read between the lines and uncover meanings that are deeper, funnier, or more strategic. Now, let's connect this to cross-cultural pragmatics. Imagine you're a Japanese university student writing an email to your professor in English. The goal is to ask the professor to review a chapter of your graduation thesis. In English, politeness is often shown through a balance of directness and courtesy. You might write something like, Dear Jim, hello, I am currently working on my graduation thesis and I would like to know if it is good. Would you mind reading one of the chapters for me? I would really appreciate it. Thanks, Tetsuya Fujimoto. Now, let's analyze. The greeting Dear Jim is simple and straightforward, which is very common in English speaking settings. The request, would you mind reading one of the chapters for me, is polite but clear. And finally, the gratitude, I would really appreciate it, shows respect for the professor's time. This kind of structure reflects English communication values, clarity, brevity, and courtesy. But if the same email were written in Japanese, it might be much more formal and indirect. Because Japanese communication often emphasizes humility and deference. This is where cross-cultural pragmatics becomes important. The same message can look very different depending on cultural expectations of politeness, directness, and respect. To conclude, flouting conversational maxims and understanding cross-cultural communication both highlight the richness of human interaction, whether it's exaggerating for humor, being vague to protect information, or adjusting tone across languages. These strategies remind us that communication is never just about words, it's about meaning. Thank you for listening. Let's now proceed to the next reporter.
This is continuation of cross-cultural pragmatics. So this part highlights how Japanese pragmatics works in formal communication. Imagine you are writing to your professor in Japan. In English, you might say, "Hello professor, can you check the thesis chapter?" But in Japan, that would sound too direct or even rude. In Japanese culture, respect and humility are very important, especially in teacher-student relationships. So instead, the students write very politely, often using apologetic and indirect language like, "I'm sorry to trouble you, but," or "if it is not inconvenient," or "even though I am afraid to ask." This shows that the student respects the professor's time and authority and doesn't want to sound like they are demanding anything. The key points here in Japanese pragmatics, politeness and indirectness are more important than efficiency or being straightforward. Next. Now this is an English translation of a typical Japanese formal email. Notice how it feels overly poetic or old-fashioned in English, like "I take up my pen," but in Japanese, it sounds natural. Now the email does three things. First, greets politely, talks about the season, which is common in Japanese letters. Second, shows humility, apologizes for asking a favor. And lastly, makes the request indirectly, asking only if it is not inconvenient. The key point here, English speakers usually go straight to the point in emails, but Japanese speakers soften requests by wrapping them in politeness. This is called negative politeness or avoiding imposition. Next slide. Now here we move to Grice's theory. Conversational implicature means that people often say less but mean more, and listeners understand the intended meaning by relying on the cooperative principle and its maxims. These are, first, the quantity, give enough info but not too much. Second, quality, be truthful. Third, relation, be relevant. And lastly, manner, be clear. Think of it this way. People don't always say exactly what they mean. Instead, they hint and listeners understood based on context. For example, if I ask you, do you like my new haircut? And you said, well, it's different. You didn't say I don't like it, but I understand that's the hidden meaning. This is conversational implicature, extra meaning created through context plus cooperation. Key point, conversational implicature is reading between the lines based on context. Next slide. Now these contrast with conversational implicature. Conventional implicatures don't rely on context or cooperative principles. Instead, they come from specific words or expressions that carry extra meaning. Example, she is poor but honest. The word but adds an extra meaning. It contrasts poverty and honesty, even if the speaker didn't explain the contrast. Another example, he is rich, therefore arrogant. The word therefore implies causation automatically. Key point, conversational implicature, context based, depends on situation, while conventional implicature rather, word based, depends on words like but, even, therefore, etc. So these are all my part. Next reporter.
I am the next reporter, and I'm going to give you some examples about conventional implicature for you to have an insight or to understand it better. In example 1, as you can see, A stated there, I hope you brought the bread and cheese. Then B answered, I brought the bread. In this example, speaker B only mentioned bread because B did not mention cheese, and we automatically understand that B did not bring the cheese. The important part here is that B didn't directly say, I didn't bring the cheese, but A can still understand the hidden meaning because of how the answer was given. The extra meaning comes from the way the words are said, not from the situation. In example 2, as you can see again, A stated, do you like ice cream? B answered, is the Pope Catholic? Here, speaker B does not say a direct yes. Instead, B uses a question that already carries meaning. Everyone knows that the Pope is Catholic, so when B answers with is the Pope Catholic, it actually means yes, of course, I like ice cream. In short, the extra meaning is carried by the praise itself. Even if you don't know the situation, you can still understand the answer because of the special praises or special praise. So, conventional implication happens when certain words or phrases carry extra meaning automatically, and you don't need context or long explanations to get the message. It's already part of how the words are normally understood. In this slide, I will explain particularized implicature and politeness in pragmatics. I know this word sounds a bit hard, but don't worry, I'll explain them in simple terms with examples so we can understand easily. Let's start with particularized implicature. This type of implicature happens when the real meaning of a statement depends on the situation or context. The words alone are not enough to understand. For examples, For example, A says you're out of coffee, then B answers, don't worry, there's a shop on the corner. Here, B did not directly say you can buy coffee there, but we already understand that what B means. We understand it because of the situation. They were talking about coffee. That's why it's called a particularized, because the meaning becomes clear only in that particular context. If you remove the situation, the meaning will be confusing. Now, let's move to politeness. Politeness is simply the way we show respect and kindness when we talk to other people. In every culture, people have their own rules on how to be polite. But in pragmatics, there's a word we use called face. Face means our public self image or how we want others to see and respect us. For example, nobody wants to feel embarrassed or insulted, right? Everyone wants to be treated with respect. That's what we call face wants. Our need for our self image to be respected. So, if a speaker says something that could hurt or embarrass another person, it is what we call a face threatening act. But if a speaker says something in a softer and more polite way to avoid hurting other person, it is called a face saving act. So here's an example. A says, I'm going to tell him to stop that awful noise right now. This is direct and can sound rude. It threatens the other person's face. Then B says, maybe you could just ask him if he can stop because it's already late and we need to sleep. This is more polite and careful. It protects the other person's face. So it is a face saving act. In simple terms, pragmatics is not just about what we say, but also about what we mean and how we say it in polite way.